أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرفهم أجمعين، نبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأرض، واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من يومنا هذا إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم: إن لقتل الحسين حرارة في قلوب المؤمنين لن تبرد أبدا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Dear Mu'mineen wa Mu'minat, dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight is the last opportunity that we will have to speak face to face in this manner, and I hope that the next few minutes that we will be engaging in this conversation will prove to be beneficial for us in this dunya and the akhirah, inshallah, as well. When the survivors and the captives of the Husseini camp, which comprised almost entirely of women and children, when they were brought to the city of Damascus, Ash-Sham, it is said that they were made to wait at the gates of the city for up to 3 days, while the court was prepared for their arrival. Well, yes, their arrival was a part of it, but it was actually being prepared for a celebration. It was being prepared for a celebration. And it wasn't just the court that was being prepared. The city was being decorated and prepared and lit up. Banners, lamps, colors. And preparations were underway so that this victory can be celebrated, commemorated in the proper fashion. It is said that all the dignitaries of the surrounding areas, the leaders of tribes, etc., it was essentially still to a large degree a tribal society, they were ordered to come to Damascus and be present. Damascus, from the time of Yazid's father, had become the capital of the Muslim lands as well. And therefore the ambassadors from different countries, from Rome, and please keep in mind that at that time when we say Rome, it is more Eastern Rome, which with the city of Istanbul as its capital, which was for a very long time far more important, far more influential, and far more powerful than Western Rome, which has its capital in Italy. From Rome, from the lands that were Mawara'un Nahr, where we see the Oxus River, north of Afghanistan, we have this natural boundary. The Muslim lands reached up to that river, but then there were lands beyond that, dignitaries from there, dignitaries from the southern Russian steppes, dignitaries from parts of Africa, perhaps dignitaries from the South continent, India. The ambassadors were informed that there is going to be a big victory celebration and they must all be present at that celebration. And they came dressed in their finest, prepared to take part in this ceremony. So now you can picture the scene. There is Yazid seated on the throne which rightfully belongs to Rasulullah. And he's also called his family, the ladies of his household. He's put up a curtain there so that the others can't see them, but they can see down into the hall. With all these dignitaries and ministers and courtiers and ambassadors, all of them gathered in their best, the hall, the court is decked up, lit up. And then when the signal is given, the captives and the prisoners and the survivors of Karbala are brought in. Obviously they are in a disheveled state. Their clothes dusty, perhaps ragged, hungry, tired, in chains, many of them perhaps. And they are brought into the center of the court. And at that time, Yazid signals again. And a slave walks in holding a tray in his hand. An expensive, perhaps bejeweled, with jewels on it, a tray. And in that tray there is something covered with a cloth. And he brings this tray. It is placed before Yazid and before the entire audience that has gathered there for this celebration. And then at Yazid's command, the cloth is lifted. And this entire audience is gazing at the radiant but severed head of Hussein ibn Ali. When this happens, the narrations say that Sayyida Zainab wails and calls out at the top of her voice, Ya Habiba Rasulallah, Yabna Makkah wa Mina, Yabna Fatimat az-Zahra. She calls out with such pain in that gathering and in that assembly that the narrations say that everyone who was present there breaks down and starts to cry. All these guests that had gathered there, they're crying. This extraordinary effect that Hazrat Zainab's statement, her expression of anguish and grief, has an extraordinary effect on others. Yazid is flummoxed, he's upset. What should he do? It's at this point that he picks up that cane that he had, and you've all heard what he did. How he disrespected this holy head, striking at the lips and the teeth of Imam Hussain alayhi salam with his thin cane that he had. He's doing this to somehow get things back into control. This is one of the first instances we see in history of the phenomenon that has then simply continued to spread, and it is beyond control now. The transformatory power of Hussein and of Karbala and his movement, this is one of those early examples of that. It first begins to show itself here and in a few other incidents, and after that it has spread till it has come to us, and we know it is now something that cannot be tamed, it can never be controlled. When he's doing this, one of the dignitaries present there, his name has been recorded in the traditions, Abu Barza al-Aslami. He's an Arab dignitary, a prominent person. He's a part of Yazid's court, so in some way he's made his peace with the Yazids to some extent or the other. He gets up and he addresses Yazid in that hall in a sharp voice, rebuking him, saying, "Oh Yazid, you are striking these lips with your cane when I, have seen with my own eyes Rasulullah kissing these lips when he was a child and kissing the lips of his brother Hassan. And I have heard with my own ears Rasulullah kissing them and saying that these two children of mine are Sayyada Shababi Halil Jannah. They are the leaders of the youth of paradise. May Allah kill and destroy the people who kill them. And Allah has prepared the worst recesses of hell for them. And you are doing this. Once again, the transformatory power of Karbala and Hussein is now beginning to show itself. That this person who is a part of the dignitaries, a part of the court, in front of Yazid, in front of everybody. Perhaps it is once again Hazrat Zainab's personality and her expression of anguish which has started to bring about this transformation. And it's no surprise. Hazrat Zainab has had this effect on other people before. If we go back a few weeks, on a day such as this, or maybe today is the 12th of Muharram, perhaps it was the 12th, the 13th, a couple of days after the cruelties and injustices in Karbala, as you know, these captives were first taken to Kufa. They arrived in Damascus several weeks later, several days later, but they were first taken to Kufa. Hazrat Zainab displayed this extraordinary influence, this ability to effect transformation, this ability to turn hearts around completely, starting from back then in Kufa. They are now being dragged into Kufa in terrible shape, of course, into the marketplace of Kufa. This is before they are taken to Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad in his court in Kufa. They are being dragged there. The marketplace, it's a crowded, busy market. People selling things, buying things, with a lot of animals as well. In those days, of course, animals were the primary means of transport, camels, horses. And animals themselves in those days, were very noisy. Also because of the fact that each of these camels in particular had these bells around their necks. Clanging of bells, sounds of hooves and neighing of horses, grunting of horses, and so have you. In that noisy environment, they are brought in. And the people of Kufa gather around them. There is a lot of wailing and crying because the people of Kufa were struck by this strange psychological crisis because they knew who these people were. They knew that they were to blame, and there was, well, that's another story in detail, but there was a lot of wailing and crying, people surrounding them in Kufa. And in that environment where it's just noise and chaos, the narrator says that Hazrat Zainab decided to speak. And it says in the narration, وَأَوْمَأَتْ بِيَدِهَا أَنُسْكُتُ. She signaled with her hand for everyone to be silent. A broken, defeated, hungry survivor in chains, in a noisy market in the victor's city. أَوْمَأَتْ بِيَدِهَا أَنُسْكُتُ. She signaled with her hand for everyone to be quiet. And the narrator says, وَارْتَدَّتِ الْأَنْفَاسِ. Everyone took in a sharp breath. وَسَكَنَتِ الْأَجْرَاسِ. It is as if the bells clanging around the necks of all the camels became silent all of a sudden. And then she went on to speak and expose the hypocrisy of the Kufans. That is for another time, the details of her khutbah. But it is this extraordinary power to influence the most hardest of hearts at a time when she is apparently at her most vulnerable and weakest. She is a prisoner in chains, in the captivity of the victor. And look at this ability to transform. So if she's doing this in Damascus, it's nothing new. She's been doing it since Kufa. And from Kufa all through the long march to Damascus. This enormous power that Lady Zainab displays. Dear brothers and sisters, this is an example of what Islam does, how it elevates people. This is Arabian society. It hasn't been very long since they were in Jahiliyyah, the pre-Islamic period of ignorance, a time when the worth of women was decided by things such as how pretty they were and whether they could sing and dance well. If they could cater to male passion and the male gaze, that was how it was decided, the worth of women in society. And let's not be under any misconception. Like so many other societies at that time and today, the oppressed, in this case women, participated in perpetuating their own oppression. Why? Because this oppression was packaged under a title which was attractive. For example, at that time it was our tribal culture. This is our way. A fake attractive package that contains nothing but degradation and enslavement. But because that covering is so attractive, it leads to the oppressed, in this case women in our example, participating in their own oppression, competing with each other to attract male attention on these factors that I mentioned. Not very different from what happens even today. In those days, it was our great tribal Arab culture. Today, it could be freedom, freedom from this, freedom from that. In that society, a society which was very recently in this position, it is only the civilizational soil and bedrock of Islam. It is only households such as the household of Ali ibn Abi Talib and Fatimatu Zahra, salamullahi alayhima. Please recite a salawat. Allah salli ala. Can bring up girls and ladies such as Hazrat Zainab, Hazrat Kulsum, and display to the world and set an example for the world, that we are an example that even now we are narrating and are inspired by, as to what the power of a woman really can be. Signal, keep quiet. Breaths go back in. All the sounds and the clanging stops. This is a defeated captive prisoner. Everyone is listening to her. When we come back to Damascus now, so when this happens, he's striking, and Abu Barza al-Aslami is condemning him, pointing out that I have heard the Holy Messenger Rasulullah say that somebody who hurts and kills Hassan and Hussein, Hassan or Hussein, is destined for hell. Yazid once again sees things are going out of control. It was bad enough that everybody was crying. He tried to get that in control. It gets worse. Somebody has the courage among his courtiers and dignitaries to get up and challenge him. He orders for Abu Barza to be thrown out. And it is at this time that Hazrat Zainab then says that I would like to speak to the audience. Now, I don't know why Yazid or the others allowed her to speak. Perhaps they felt they're under some kind of pressure of that, if we don't allow her to speak, it will look bad. Or perhaps they felt that she is in such a poor situation, in such a difficult situation, that when she speaks, it will somehow work out to be in Yazid's favor. But I don't know why exactly, but it's I still haven't been able to figure out why he allowed her to speak. But it so happens that she begins to speak, dear brothers and sisters. And this is the famous khutbah as-Sayyida Zainab fi Sham. Please recite a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This is her famous khutbah. It is a long khutbah. It is divided into several parts. Some parts dealing with the glory and majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some parts dealing with the role of Rasulullah in Islam, in human history, his extraordinary position. The leader of the caravan of creation, all of it. Then it comes and talks about the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, condemns Yazid, rebukes him sharply. In parts, you can even say she goes on to challenge him. Prisoner in chains in the court of the victor. This khutbah, it is interesting. There is a very interesting book, dear brothers and sisters. It is a book written in the 3rd century Hijrah. That means more than 1,000 years before today. It is a book by the name of Balaghatun Nisa. Balaghatun Nisa. There is a scholar of that time, a scholar who was Sunni. His name is Ibn Tayfur. He was born and he passed away in the 3rd century, more than 1,000 years ago. In that book, this book is still, alhamdulillah, with us and available. It continues to be published and republished. In that book, he has gathered khutabat, speeches or perhaps sentences which have been delivered by ladies. Extremely eloquent speeches and statements delivered by ladies. Almost all or all of them, if I'm not mistaken, pertaining to the period after Islam. Once again, it is Islam which brings this flowering of abilities in women. And in this is one of the important sources for this khutbah recorded by Ibn Tayfur, the Sunni alim, in this book. Many other khutbahat here as well. This khutbah of Hazrat Kulthum in Kufa, also recorded here, for example. It's a book that is worth having and worth looking at. Anyway, in this book, we have a record of this khutbah, and the khutbah deals with several parts till she finally comes to this part in the khutbah. She says, challenging Yazid, she says, Fakid kaidak, do your worst. Okay, kid kaidak. Was'a sa'ya, try as hard as you can. Wanasib juhdak, make every effort that you possibly can. This is how she's addressing him in court. And then she says, فَوَاللَّهِ لَا تَمْحُ ذِكْرَنَا, I swear by Allah, you will not be able to erase our remembrance or memory. And all of us here today, we are a small example of this fact. فَوَاللَّهِ لَا تَمْحُ ذِكْرَنَا, I swear by Allah, do your worst, do whatever you can. You will not be able to erase our memory, our zikr. And it is true, brothers and sisters. We see it, we feel it, we observe it everywhere. It's not just survived the zikr of Karbala, it has flourished. It has continuously grown from strength to strength. There is simply no doubt about it. If I am to try and, for example, spend any time proving to you that the zikr of Karbala is alive, it is like trying to prove to you that you are alive. You know you are alive. I don't need to prove it to you. Just as you know you are alive, you know the zikr of Karbala is alive. It's a worthless exercise to try and prove that yes, it continues to be alive. If there is anything that may be worth discussing for a few minutes, it is to try and understand why and how it has stayed alive. And the answers to this question, why is it that the zikr of Karbala has stayed alive? The answer to this question too is varied. There isn't a single answer. We can provide several different kinds of answers, approaching it from different perspectives. We can approach it, for example, from a material aspect and point out certain reasons, certain spiritual reasons, certain other things, God's plan, various aspects. There are various aspects to this. I will, in the few minutes that we have today, touch upon one of these aspects. The question is, why has it survived? And this question arises because its survival is remarkable. The fact of its survival is not in doubt, but it is a remarkable fact that it has survived, dear brothers and sisters. So many other things have happened in history that have not survived. They've been forgotten, including things that are closely associated with Shia. They have not survived even in the memory of the Shia communities. Let me just give you a handful of examples. Right after the events at Karbala, there was another event during the rule of Yazid. Yazid's rule lasted barely 3 years. There was another major event. Karbala was a terrible massacre. 70, 100, whatever, a number of people were massacred there. A much larger number was massacred just a few months or so after Karbala by Yazid's army. But it's hardly remembered. What was this event? This is the event when the people of Medina, when they hear about Karbala, etc., they're deeply upset. And they rise up in rebellion. They rise up in rebellion against Yazid. And they expel Yazid's governor from Medina. Yazid sends an army. And this army engages in battle with the people of Medina, ransacks Medina, loots and pillages Medina, defeats the Medinans. No one knows how many people were killed, how many thousands, and what kind of crimes were engaged in by this victorious army, crimes that I cannot mention while speaking from the mimbar. But this has not really survived. It has survived in history, but it has not survived in memory. This was a big crime. This was a big event right at that time. We take another event that has barely survived, not in memory, just in our history books. Sometimes we mention it, but it's not really something which is commonly known and remembered. This is interestingly connected in some way to Imam Hussein, and yet it has not survived. Its zikr as a popular memory has not survived. And that, as you know, is that a number of people, many of them or most of them based in Kufa, who were among those who had invited Imam Hussein to Kufa and who had been ardent followers of Imam Ali when he was the Khalifa with his government in Kufa. After the events of Karbala, they were struck by remorse and they realized that they had sinned, they had failed their Imam. They had failed to support Muslim, and they had failed to turn up in Karbala and fight against the army which was there to fight Hussein. People like Sulaiman ibn Surad al-Khuzai and others, notable leaders of the Shia community in Kufa at that time. Of course, we must keep in mind that the Shia and Sunni distinction was not that sharp at that time. There were no, for example, separate localities, separate cities, separate mosques or things like that. No, It was one community where certain individuals or families or tribes were known for being Shia because of the notable and remarkable love and commitment and desire to follow the Ahl al-Bayt that existed in them. So they were known as Shia. So at that time, the movement called Tawwabin took shape. You are familiar with it. Perhaps you have seen this serial Mukhtar Nama, which I mentioned, I think, on an earlier night as well. If you haven't, this is a very good time, these months of Muharram and Safar, to watch this serial. It has been dubbed into several languages, which deals with this phenomenon as well. They are a people who then, when struck by remorse, they formed an army of thousands who wanted to take revenge. Their cry was, Ya la Tharatil Hussein. We seek revenge for the blood of Hussein. And what's more, they said it's not important whether we are going to win or lose. If we win, that's great. If we die, it will be our tawbah. And that is why they were known as the Tawwabin, those who are doing tawbah. But this is not there in popular memory, it's only there in history. Several battles were fought with Yazid's armies. Thousands. In the last battle, the remnants of them, it is said 4,000, 7,000 of them were massacred in one battle. Those who were fighting for Hussein. Not for Hussein, with the name of Hussein, by the name of Hussein, due to a sense of remorse that they felt related to Hussein. But it's not survived. Why look so far back? Let's come to these present times. Things which are closely associated with Shia society, but whose memory has not survived. Many of you had already been born by the time the Intifada al-Sha'baniyah took place in March and April of 1991. March and April of 1991. Many of us had already been born. Some of us were young men at that time. And despite that, it's possible that we've not heard of it. When the Iraqi tyrant and dictator was goaded into attacking Kuwait or encouraged into attacking Kuwait, and then that was used as a pretext to then fly in an army from that side of the world into West Asia, and therefore develop new military bases, etc., etc. And then Iraq was attacked, and that tyrant's army was obliterated. At that time, the people of Iraq, the majority of Iraq, as you know that the majority of Iraq's population is Shia, they rose up in revolt against this tyrant. The southern half of this country, which is almost exclusively populated by the Shia at that time and today, they rose up in rebellion, in armed rebellion against. And when they did that, so that they could be free from the rule of this tyrant, when they did that, with Husseini slogans, led by their religious scholars, when they did this, at that point, the same tyrannical power that had crushed the army or had crushed the Iraqi tyrant, that same foreign tyrannical power, then went on to provide the Iraqi tyrant, who was on his knees at that point, very weak, to provide him intelligence, satellite imagery, and all sorts of help so as to be able to crush this Shia-led rebellion. And in that, it is estimated anything between 100,000 to possibly 500,000 people were killed in the period of 1 month. A few years back, they discovered a mass grave where it is estimated that in that one single mass grave, there may be 10,000 bodies, civilians. But most of us have not heard of it. The survival of the zikr of Karbala is truly remarkable, and it should engage our minds. What are the causes that has led to the survival of this zulm and oppression, when there have been many other episodes of zulm and oppression as well, some of them seemingly, at least when it comes to numbers, being far larger than the numbers that we see. So it's not about numbers, there's something else to it. Have people been killed before? Yes. Have women and children been enslaved before? Yes, before and after. And it happens, unfortunately. There's something unique about this. And I don't claim to be able to know the full answer to it, or to be able to even present a complete answer, even if I were given enough time. In the few minutes that we have, I just want to hint at one thing, point at one thing, which may provide us something to align to think about. Part of the answer, and also raise some new questions that may be helpful in taking our lives forward in a more meaningful way. Please recite a salawat on Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah.
बचाने का हुसैनियत को बचाने का नाम है ज़ैनब खुशनूदिये बीबी ज़ैनब सलामुल्लाह अलैहा बुलंद तरीन सलावत.
There is another khutbah which has been recorded, another khutbah delivered by these prisoners in that same court of Yazid in Damascus. There's another khutbah. And this is a khutbah delivered by the Imam of that time, the fourth Imam, Hazrat Zainul Abidin alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Once again, it is a long khutbah and with several sections. I just want to read out the first few lines, the first one or two lines perhaps, which help us perhaps find part of the answer to this. It begins like this: Ya ayyuhan nas, O people, u'tina sittan, we have been given 6 things. وَفُضِّلْنَا بِالسَّبْعٍ, and we have been granted superiority over others through 7 things. We have been given 6 things, granted superiority over the others through 7 things. This is how he begins. And then he lists these 6 things. He says, أُعْتِينَ الْعِلْمَ, we have been granted knowledge. وَأُعْتِينَ الْحِلْمَ, we have been granted dignity and forbearance. Wasamaha, and munificence, giving, forgiveness, the ability to forgive others. Samaha. Wal fasaha, the 4th thing. Fasaha, eloquence. We've been granted eloquence. We can see that in Hazrat Zainab's speech, and we can see that in all the Ahlul Bayt. Really, it is remarkable the eloquence that exists in their speech. We have been granted wal fasaha, eloquence. Was shaja'a, we have been granted bravery. And then he says, wal mahabbata fi qulub al mu'minin. Dear brothers and sisters, it is the 6th thing that he mentions in this list of 6 that I would like to spend a couple of minutes on. Wal mahabbata fi qulub al mu'minin. We have been granted this from Allah. This is one of the things that separates us, Ahlul Bayt, he means to say, from all the others, Yazid and others. This decision, this granting of by Allah, this decision of Allah of placing this love in your heart, in my heart, in all our hearts, fi qulubil mu'minin, is one of the things that sets the Ahlul Bayt apart from the rest. And dear brothers and sisters, this is part of the answer to this question as to why is it that this event, this zikr has survived so long. It is the result of this love that has been planted in our hearts through Allah's will and through the efforts of our parents and our grandparents and our teachers and of the various scholars of earlier times and this times that have struggled to make sure that this zikr stays alive. It is the irada and the will of Allah that this love will continue to blaze forth in our hearts, and this is what sets it. This is one of the important things. As I said, I don't claim to present the complete answer. That has ensured that this zikr stays alive, and it allows Hazrat Zainab to proclaim with confidence, do your worst, for wallahi la tamhu zikrana. By Allah, you will not be able. When this love, as long, fi qulub al-mu'mineen, as long as there are mu'mineen, as long as there are believers, they will have hearts, and as long as they have hearts, this love will live on and flower in their hearts, and which will ensure that massacres that on the face of it are terrible, involving larger numbers, involving apparently far greater cruelties and injustices, they may fade. And even though those massacres may have something to do with Shia, even then they fade from our memories. But la tamhu dhikrana, we see that and we feel that in our lives. Love, dear brothers and sisters, has this important effect. Love. And when we are commanded, it's very interesting that we have been commanded to love, when love is something which is in a way involuntary. But it is interesting that we have been commanded to love the Ahlul Bayt. Even though I think it's one of those commands that is basically a guidance, because none of us needs this command. We love the Ahlul Bayt anyway. Anybody, any human beings who finds out anything about the Ahlul Bayt ends up falling in love with the Ahlul Bayt and loving the Ahlul Bayt. Love, dear brothers and sisters, inspires. Love, dear brothers and sisters, provides energy. Love, dear mu'mineen wa mu'minat, provides a role model to emulate. And love, dear brothers and sisters, provides obedience, leads to obedience. And we can feel this very easily. Why is it that we parents, why is it that when our little children, for example, they demand something, a grown man walking on all fours becomes a horse so that his kid can sit on his back? A child demands a toy, the father goes and gets it. Obedience. Obedience is the natural outcome of love, dear brothers and sisters. And when love is love which has been willed by Allah, mahabbata fi qulubil mu'mineen, we can only imagine the extent of obedience that it can lead to, the extent of placing our entire existence and everything that we have at the service of the Masumeen, so that they can achieve their goals with our complete participation in their mission. So, dear brothers and sisters, this little piece from Imam Zainul Abidin's speech might provide us a direction. Let me close with a mention of Imam Zainul Abidin, our fourth Imam, when, as you know, that he was one of the important narrators of the events, particularly as they happened after Karbala. In Karbala, he was severely unwell. It was apparently Allah's way and plan of keeping him safe, keeping Imamat safe so that it continues. But then after Karbala, when he recovered his health, a couple of days after the events of Karbala, or a few weeks, whenever, soon after Karbala, we see him playing an important role. And therefore, it is not surprising that when it comes to the Musiba and Masaib of Sham, he has an important role to play as a narrator. One of the things that has been narrated from him is that he was asked, Yabna Rasulullah, all these trials and tribulations and Masaib and Musiba that you and your family were subjected to in Karbala and through this entire period, at what point was it the most difficult for you to bear? At what point? Perhaps the person who was asking this question thought he will get this as an answer. It was terrible when I got to know that My brother Ali Akbar has been martyred. Or perhaps my brother Ali Asghar, this little infant. Or perhaps when I was told that my father's son, his father's head has been cut off and put on top of. But no, he said none of these things. When he was asked this question, Yabna Rasulullah, Ya Maula, at what point did the trials and tribulations become the most difficult to bear? He replied, answering thrice, Asham, Asham, Asham. Do we know what happened in Sham? Do we know what happened to them? They were brought to the gates with their hands tied. They were made to wait near the gate for a few days. You've heard this. But after that, when everything was ready and they could now be brought into the city, they were put on to the ladies of the household of the Rasulullah, the children, with their hands tied, were forced to get on to camels that had no saddles. Very difficult to hold on to a camel while you're seated on it, while it has no saddle. And that too when your hands are tied. After that, they were paraded through the city of Damascus. They were paraded through the city of Damascus, from this market to that market. It said, some say, in fact, it took them almost a day to reach the court. And the people of that city, this is Sham, this is not Kufa. The Kufans knew who this is. The Kufans, for all their hypocrisy and everything, they were struck by remorse. But Sham, this is a city that has been brought up for 2 generations on fake news, on lies about the Ahlul Bayt. They believe that Ali and his family, his children, are the enemies of Islam. And therefore, there is a narration, a traveler says, I was traveling from wherever he belonged to. I was going on a pilgrimage to Palestine, to Baitul Muqaddas. I was going on a pilgrimage to Palestine. And I was passing through Damascus. I stopped there for a few days on my pilgrimage. Baitul Muqaddas is one of the holiest of Islam's sites and sanctuaries and sanctities. I stopped there. And I suddenly noticed that everyone was very happy. Everyone was dressed in their best clothes. They were hanging these colored banners all over the city. They were lighting lamps. I could hear the sound of music and singing and dancing coming from several homes. So I asked somebody, I said that, is it some kind of Eid? Do the people of Sham have some other Eid that we Muslims in other parts of the Islamic lands don't have and I don't know of? And that's when I was informed that no, we are in fact celebrating the victory of Islam over the enemies of Islam. And so, dear brothers and sisters, when this caravan was being taken through the various parts of the city, one of the things that the Shamis, the people of Damascus and Sham, did was that they gathered on their rooftops, the ladies especially, and they would jeer at these prisoners as they were passing by, making fun of them, shouting obscenities at them, disrespecting them. And some of them had these rags of cloth, dry grass. They would set that on fire, and then throw these burning rags, these bunches of hay and straw burning on the Ahlul Bayt. And that's when we have a narration from the 4th Imam. He says that I was struck by one of these rags and my turban caught fire. But because my hands were tied, I was not able to throw this turban off. The turban burnt and part of the skin of my head burnt as well. These are Muslimin who are doing this. And do you know what else happened in Sham? When they were being paraded around, one of the narrators says that I saw this strange sight. I saw this strange sight. I went up close to where all this hullabaloo was, and this caravan of these prisoners were being led, and people were shouting and screaming and singing and throwing rags of fire. And I went near one of the camels, and I managed to speak to the lady sitting on it. And I asked her, "Who are you?" I had no idea who they were. "Who are you?" She said, "I am the daughter of Hussein ibn Ali." I was struck by a thunderbolt. I couldn't believe it. How can it be? But I realized that I could not do anything at that time because I was in Damascus surrounded. So I told her that I am one of the companions of Rasulullah. I have seen Rasulullah with my own eyes. Tell me, is there anything I can do for you? Tell me, is there anything I can do for you? And do you know what she said, that lady? She said, "Yes, you can do one thing for me. Go to these soldiers and tell them to carry the heads ahead of us." To carry the heads ahead of us. Dear brothers and sisters, it had been arranged such that if Rabab was sitting on this camel, the head of Ali Asghar was there. If Layla was sitting there, there was the head of her. I would wonder, is that so difficult or painful now? They've been traveling with these heads for weeks now. They saw them being martyred. Is it now suddenly so difficult to bear the proximity of these heads? No, dear brothers and sisters. This lady tells him why she wants this to happen, why she wants the heads to be taken, all of them separately ahead, so that the ladies and the children can come further behind. She says that I am not dressed appropriately. I do not have the required hijab at this time. I belong to Rasulullah's household. I am not dressed in the appropriate fashion at this time. If you take the heads ahead, they will all be staring at these severed heads, and they will not look at me and my other family members, the other ladies at my house. Take these heads ahead so that the crowds can stare at the heads instead of us. Allahu Akbar. And that companion says that, yes, I went ahead. I bribed some of these soldiers so that they could take the heads further ahead. Eventually, this caravan, after the events of the court, etc., they are then given a place to stay. They're given a place to stay. It's a ruin. Imam Sajjad narrates that we were made to stay in a place which had no roof. In the day, the sun would burn us, and at night we had no protection from the desert cold. We were made to stay in such a place. And while we were staying there, it has been narrated that while this family was there and somehow managing to get by, it seems it kind of opened out into a part of the city. There is a little girl. She's sitting with her aunt in this ruin. They are prisoners in this ruin, but it seems that they were able to look down upon the street somewhere below, and she sees children going here, going there. This little girl, 3 years old, 4 years old, she asks her aunt, she says, "Ya Ammati, oh my dear aunt, where are these children going?" The aunt answers, "Nothing, my dear, they must be going home." And Hazrat Sakina says, "Where is our home?" Hazrat Zainab says, "It is in Medina." The memories of Medina, of the childhood, the lovely childhood that she spent at her home with her loving father, they come back to her. And then she asks her aunt, "Ya Ammati, where is my father? Where is my father?" And she says, "He's gone on a journey. He's left for a journey." The child doesn't say anything. The child then falls asleep in her aunt's lap. And after some time, the child wakes up crying. She's seen some kind of a dream. She's very worried. She's crying profusely in the middle of the night. And she's asking for her father. She's asking for her father. She says, I want to see my father. Hazrat Zainab is trying to quieten her. Word reaches Yazid that this is happening in that imprisonment, in that ruin. And Yazid orders that Hussein ibn Ali's head be sent to this little girl. The head arrives, dear brothers and sisters. This little girl removes the cloth, sees her father's head there, takes it into her arms, and speaking tenderly to her father says, oh my dear father, who is it that has hurt you? Who is it that has caused the blood to turn your beard red? Who is it that has hurt you, my dear father? La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah al-ali al-azim sayalamu alladhina zalamu ayyamun qalbin yanqalibun. पर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु